X is the latest A24 horror production that's written and directed by Ty West. All I really knew to expect going into this film was some sort of homage to the classic slasher genre. The classic cabin in the woods horror film, if you will. And after watching it, that's certainly what we got. But it manages to avoid being derivative by approaching the genre in a way that both embraces and subverts the tropes that are present within this type of horror film. But before we move on any further, I'd like to quickly shill a review that I did for this film. It's a review that I put out with the boys right after watching the film. So for someone like me who's really into boring content like that, I think you'd love it. And of course, always feel free to check out my Patreon and see if you're interested in receiving some cool perks like voting in polls and joining the best film-loving community this world has to offer in my Discord. You can find the link in the description box below. And now I promise I'm officially done chilling. Without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into X. So, how is X able to contain all the tropes present in the slasher genre that some horror fans have grown tired of, yet at the same time subverting these tropes in ways that come off fresh, cheeky, and unique? Well, firstly, what are the tropes present in X? Let's start off with the title of the film, which is obviously X. The title is a reference to the main character, Maxine, played by Mia Goth. The producer character in the film consistently refers to her as the X Factor. Or more precisely, he refers to her as someone who has that X Factor. What is even an X Factor? Well, generally an X Factor is a term used to describe someone or something that contains some type of special skill or attribute that can have a significant impact on the outcome of something, and at times in an unpredictable way. And an X Factor is something that is present in every classic slasher film, in the sense that there is always at least one character that survives the longest or outright prevails by their virtue, skill set, or greater decision-making abilities. So in a way, by having her character be referred to as having an X Factor, the film is hinting to the audience that Maxine will indeed be the last one standing. So in this regard, the film is embracing the X Factor trope, but it subverts it by assigning this X Factor to the wrong character. Well, wrong in the sense that, traditionally, it's the most innocent character that prevails in the end. But here with X, it's the most innocent character, which is Lorraine, played by Jenna Ortega, that gets murdered in the third act by getting shot in the face with a shotgun. Brutal shit. So why does the film do this exactly? Well, it's obviously not only doing this to subvert expectations, but it's also doing this to emphasize its own established thematic purpose as well. To elaborate, innocence is usually what's praised and protected in most slasher films, but X had a different idea in mind. The way that I interpreted this is that instead of rewarding innocence, it rewards self-actualization, which is a word I'm basically using to describe the act of knowing oneself and embracing who you are and what you've become. Lorraine actually fit this category pretty well for the first half of the film. She was reserved, against the idea of helping to produce pornography, and also just had a bad feeling about the location in general. It isn't until her mind becomes a bit hypnotized by pornography that she decides she wants to do a scene in the porno, which ultimately corrupts her character. But this is not the reason why the film punishes her. When Maxine saves her in the end, Lorraine rejects any help from her while also criticizing her lifestyle and blaming her for everything that's happened. And for this, she's immediately punished as she runs out the door and gets shot in the face. This is because she refused to own the decisions she made and embrace the kind of person she realized she was. It's her total rejection of her actions and accountability that led her to be killed. This is also the case with the villains of the film. Although aging and coming to terms with death and being unable to appear beautiful and make love is a terrifying reality we all have to deal with, they still refuse to come to terms with who they've become and deal with the unfortunate limitations of old age. As opposed to Maxine, who has fully embraced the kind of person she's become, regardless of the shame she receives from religion and society. This is further emphasized by one of the final scenes in the film that reveals that she is the daughter of the preacher we see on TV throughout the film. This is again to show that she was once the innocent Christian girl that her family and society wanted her to be, but she eventually decided to break free from the ideology and become who she desires to be and never look back. It also reveals that the repeating phrase that she says to herself throughout the film, the phrase that says, "I will not live a life that I don't deserve," it reveals that this is a phrase that she in fact got from her preacher father. but she was able to interpret this in her own way and apply it to her life that is essentially the opposite of the way that her father meant it. And all of this, in a way, is another trope subversion where normally American Christian values are rewarded, but in X, the character that totally rejects the ideology is the one who prevails. Another trope in slasher films is sexuality, and this film offers loads of that. The film embraces the sex trope by having it as a cornerstone of the plot and characters. All of these characters set out to produce a porno in a secluded cabin, and the film is able to subvert the sex trope in a few different ways. The biggest way it subverts it is that if anybody was punished heavily for sexual behavior, it was actually the villains of the film as opposed to one of the many hedonistic main characters. Obviously, in a classic slasher, it's the youth that is immediately punished for sexual behavior. But in X, it's not only the elderly, but also the villains that experience a demise brought on by their sexuality, which kind of makes it a double subversion. But the villains being distracted by sex allows Maxine to escape and kill them soon after. Not to mention the old man dies of a heart attack, which is highly likely due to the sex. The only other character whose downfall was arguably brought upon by sex was the innocent Lorraine. And as I already mentioned, she shares a similarity to the elderly villains in the sense that they both refuse to accept change or accountability based on either their actions or limitations. So the only characters that were punished for having sex were the characters that lacked self-actualization and understanding of oneself. One last trope that I have to talk about is this kind of curiosity killed the cat trope. I know it's not formally known as that, but that's the way that I always view it when I watch these classic slasher films. All I mean by this is that in slasher flicks, and really most horror films in general, there are always characters that irrationally decide to investigate creepy areas based on some kind of noise or movement. And it's this type of irrational curiosity that ultimately leads to their demise. But in X, even though there are many instances where the characters slowly wander and investigate, it doesn't come off as completely unreasonable or dumb. The characters aren't just all pea-brained young adults that are written in a conveniently dumb way just so they can be killed off. And most of that, I believe, is attributed to the fact that the villains are incredibly old, which would not only catch anybody off guard, but also help them if they're in need. Whether it's Maxine following the old lady into the house, or Kid Cudi helping the old man find his wife, or the producer peeping through the door. The only one that I feel like is arguably dumb is Lorraine going into the basement to get a flashlight. But even then, you can kind of understand why someone would do that. And that's to, again, just help an incredibly old man that literally seems like he's gonna die of old age in the next few seconds. So I loved how we were able to watch a slasher film that was able to embrace the suspense building element brought on by curious characters without having their curiosity be so dumbfounded. And of course, this film was packed with so many other different subverted tropes, but these three were the ones that really stuck out to me and I found quite compelling. And overall, I feel like this film was going to have gigantic appeal to a lot of different film lovers because this film, I feel like, is going to give a lot of horror fans exactly what they would want. But at the same time, I think a lot of film lovers will get a lot out of this film just because of the way that it's able to celebrate the horror genre, again, without coming off as derivative and embracing things that people love about it, while at the same time subverting a lot of things that people have also grown tired of. Yeah, but for me personally, this is a film that I had a lot of fun with and have been thinking about for quite some time, and I'm really curious to hear what everybody else has to say in regards to this film. Not only your opinion, but also any insight that you might bring to the table, because again, this film is packed with a lot of different things that I feel like a lot of people would probably really love to talk about. But that's basically all I got to say about X. If you really enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it amongst your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be updated on more film-related content.